The thing about mysteries is they always start in the dark. And in Clue Harbor, the dark is all we ever really knew.
I used to think nothing could break me, until that night. My life, such as it is, runs on late hours and caffeine. I make stories for people who like to listen to other people's misfortune while the rest of the world sleeps. I am a small-time podcaster. I record late-night mystery stories in a studio that's really just the corner of my one-bedroom apartment. A closet draped in blankets, an old mic mounted on a cheap arm, a laptop with a stubborn fan. Names change, narrators change, but the work is routine. I like that. Routine is safe. Routine sounds like a microphone, a breath, the faint hum of the refrigerator. And then the world folding into a piece of audio I can cut and shape and put back out into the dark. People tell me I have a voice for narration. Maybe I do. Maybe what I have is a voice that wants to be heard. I say that like it's a joke, because the real jokes are quieter now. Back then, it was always just me and the stories I told, editing until 3 a.m., then posting and checking analytics with a mix of hopeful curiosity and a kind of amateur pride. I'd play an episode to myself on the subway in the morning or to the ceiling at night, and the rhythm of my sentences felt like a small, private language. I believed in the shape of that language. I believed I could control it. The first whisper happened the week I got careless. I was working on episode 21 of the Midnight series, a tale about a missing woman and an empty house with too many doors. The night was warm. The air smelled like hot tar and coffee. I remember the light in my kitchen, the yellow over the sink. I remember, oddly, the feel of a bruise forming on my shin from where I'd bumped the kitchen island earlier. These pure, ordinary details anchor me to that memory. When you tell a story about the way the world changes, it helps to start here, small things first. I was hunched over the waveform, the software's display of my voice like a mountain range. I sliced out a click. I tightened the EQ. I ran a noise reduction because the AC was whining in a low, steady note. I made a habit of listening through headphones at low volume, so the rest of the night didn't feel like an intrusion. That night, as always, I scrubbed the timeline forward, listening for breaths or slips. At 0142 in the track, an innocuous place, the middle of a paragraph, there was a breath I didn't take. At first, I thought I'd left a track muted under another. I looked at the levels. I toggled the solo button. The waveform in that sliver was a thin, almost invisible line. But when I slid the playhead over it and lifted the volume, a whisper rose like condensation. It wasn't my voice. Not really. It didn't have the cadence I have. It didn't have the little uptick I put on the ends of my sentences when I was narrating a punchline. It was thinner, as if someone had spoken into a room far away. The words were indistinct, phonemes more than meaning, but there was a pitch to it, a cadence that slid under my words. I froze the timeline and stared at the waveform like it might explain itself. People who do this job get used to anomalies. Stuff happens. Old tapes bleed, equipment makes ghosts. I told myself that. I told it aloud to the room. The room ate the reassurance. I nudged the clip to the left, as if proximity might make sense of it. When I boosted the mid-range and slowed the playback by 20%, the whisper sharpened into a fragment that suggested language. Not a whole sentence, a scrape at the edge of comprehension. I returned it to normal speed and tried again. Different settings, different plugins. The voice didn't go away. It hid, it revealed, it suggested. I convinced myself the next morning that it was a stray sample, a leftover from one of those free sound packs I downloaded in a month of trying to level up. I told friends in the shallow way you tell friends about a weird thing in your work. Funny, right? Audio gremlins. People laughed and sent me gifs. The laughter was warm, but small. And then it came back in episode 23. Now it wasn't a fragment, it was a pattern. It threaded under the intro, a quiet thing that waxed when I paused, that sharpened when I breathed. It never interrupted the main story, it lived in the margins, but it implied attention. It seemed to listen the way a mirror listens, patient, reflective. I don't have many possessions, but I have a hard drive full of episodes, session files with names like Midnight EP 23 Final, and timestamps that make me feel like I'm chronically rushing. I loaded the old session, rolled back to earlier takes, and there the voice was, so faint I almost missed it, under a take recorded on a Tuesday in June before I tightened the mic or remembered to turn the fan off. The rational explanation stretched like thin paper. Could be a plug-in glitch. Could be an artifact of how the sample rate translated between devices. Could be me, accidentally recording breath through the mic while chewing my tongue in a stressed rhythm. I went down those rabbit holes with the precision of someone who needs to stay grounded. I checked logs, I swapped cables, I recorded 100 test sweeps and sent them to an online forum where engineers trade theories like baseball cards. No one could replicate it. No one said, "Oh yeah, that's a known bug." That phrase, "no one," comes with a quiet metal taste in the mouth when you're trying to stay calm. The more people who told me it wasn't something they could explain, the more it felt like something I was supposed to notice alone. The voice tightened its focus in small ways. At first, it flitted around the edges, random vowels, the impression of consonants. Then it began to reference things you could only know if you had been in my life. Not dramatic confessions, but trivial, intimate facts. The way my apartment smells when I forget to take the trash out. The small flare under my left eyelid when I get tired. The exact flavor of coffee I prefer when I'm pretending to be an adult in a cafe. The first time I recognized the detail that couldn't be gleaned from a public profile or my Instagram, something I hadn't said to anyone in years, I felt like a window had opened in my head and a cold hand was sliding through. I didn't tell anyone right away. Who would I tell? An old friend who's too busy? My producer? A stranger? Part of the study of fear is cataloging your own disbelief. I told myself different stories to keep my routine intact. That was the scaffolding I clung to. Keep working, keep breathing, keep the mic oriented, keep the episodes going. I edited and posted, analytics flicked up and down, comments came in, some from listeners who liked the cadence, some from people who said they were creeped out in the best way. One person wrote that the episodes felt personal, like someone whispering in my ear. That comment made my stomach cave in and then expand. I deleted it later because I couldn't stand seeing that phrasing. Sleep became optional. Not metaphorically, the hours simply stopped belonging to me. I would leave the mic running with a blank file open and pretend it was monitoring, like a guard left with a walkie-talkie. I'd go to bed on the couch with the laptop on my chest, the small light from the screen painting the ceiling a sick, oily blue. In the silence of those nights, the room felt thick, as if sound had weight. I kept thinking of the whisper in the waveform when I closed my eyes. As the voice became clearer, my life narrowed to a few obsessions. I traced its appearances in a spreadsheet like crime scene evidence. File name, time code, plugins used, notes on the texture of the whisper. I slept with headphones on. I boiled water for coffee at 2 a.m. like an astronaut preparing for a spacewalk. I started keeping a journal of the things the voice described about me. Tiny, damning inventories so I could cross-check and prove something had happened. The lists grew like a fungus. It began to refer to me directly. Not you in the broad sense, but you in the way that knows the private things names know. Habits, small compulsions, the way I say a line when I'm trying not to cry. It didn't need to use my name to know me. Language is adaptable. It can be personal without details. I felt exposed in the way you feel when someone reads the margins of a notebook you thought you'd hidden. Every time the voice grew, I tried to trap it with technique. I ran spectral analyses. I listened for frequency bands. If I filtered certain ranges, the whisper bled into something like vowels stretched out across a piano. If I slow-played a segment, the hint of a syllable resolved into an almost word I couldn't own. One night, I isolated a clip from an early episode, processed with every tool in the plugin folder, and what bloomed out felt less human and more like a pattern of intention. It was like looking at waveforms that weren't just sound, but handwriting. My hands began to shake as I worked. Sometimes I would pause the playback and press my fingertips to the mic, as if contact might settle the jitter in my chest. I don't like being watched. I don't like being noticed in ways that I didn't choose. The voice had crossed into that territory. It began to name the ways I watched myself. It described the faces I made while I was editing. It identified the shallow breath I take when I'm about to delete a clip and pretend nothing happened. It could either be an elaborate coincidence or something deliberately curated. And then, an episode ran where the voice described a memory I couldn't account for. Not a dramatic revelation, no hidden crime or familial betrayal. It painted a scene instead. A summer rain on the roof of a house I lived in when I was very young. The way the window left a smear of light, the particular arrangement of mismatched chairs in the kitchen, a cracked teacup on the counter. The voice didn't just report the scene. It recited the small, idiosyncratic detail of how I used to rub my thumb along the seam of the armchair because I didn't know how else to keep my hands busy. I hadn't thought of that chair in years. I hadn't told anyone about that thumb ritual because it felt silly, private. My breath left through my mouth like I had exhaled an entire year. I dove through old boxes, looking for photographs, for proof. Memory is funny. It lives in the shape of language. Pull a phrase, and the memory follows. I found a Polaroid with a smear on the corner, a living room that matched the voice's description. The handwriting on the back was my mother's, in a looping script. She had died a long time ago. I had never told anyone about the particular way the rain sounded in that apartment. No one else would have known. Now the whisper wasn't just personal, it was intimate in ways that felt impossible. It knew things even the parts of me that try to protect my own memory had surrendered. The rational thought, someone was compiling all these details from disparate places, old posts, public records, conversations I had in the presence of the wrong person, didn't hold. The whisper had access to the architecture of my interior. I stopped editing in earnest. I began to record everything. Ambient noise of my street, the hum of the fridge, the rustle of my sheets, the toaster clicking. I left my laptop open at night, watching the line crawl like a pulse. When I did sleep, it was shallow, and sometimes in the grayness just before dawn, I'd have a sensation like a hand on the back of my neck. Not pressure, not pain, a tension. I would wake and the cursor on the screen would be mid-line on a session file I didn't remember opening. Files would have timestamps that showed they had been rendered at times when I was certain I was asleep. I bought a cheap camera and aimed it at the microphone. The footage showed the soft glow of the LED and my chest rising and falling. In one night's clip, halfway through a long rendered file, the camera caught the laptop waking and the hard drive light flickering at 3:17 a.m. There was no corresponding spike in my movement. Nothing in the frame suggested a human hand. The software logs, however, recorded a manual edit. Someone or something had opened the session, applied effects, rendered it. The directory showed the mouse cursor moving between menus. There were clicks. The breakdown has a geometry. It folds inward and sharpens. Every rational explanation becomes a ladder out of your skull, and you pull it up behind you. I stopped sleeping on the bed because the bed felt like a place where the voice could reach me best. I started sleeping on the sofa with a blanket thrown over my head to mimic the way we deaden sound in makeshift studios. The voice leaked into dreams. It refused the soft fence between day and night. The climax. There is always a climax if you keep sitting with something long enough. Mine came one afternoon after a week with nothing but low coffee and panic, and a string of half-sent emails to engineers who didn't answer. I had promised a special episode to a small but loyal audience, a compilation of strange user-submitted recordings. I opened the file to tidy it up before posting, and found a single track at the end that I didn't remember importing. Not in the metadata, no file name, just a clip the length of a breathing spell. I played it. The recording contained my voice layered under itself in this impossible way, like multiple takes merged into a chorus. Beneath that, quieter, the whisper filtered up, and then, this is the part where I have to be careful with the language because I refuse to type words that would feel like direct dialogue, but I must convey the sense of what happened. The whisper described the exact movement I was about to make in the room in the next minute. The way my hand would hesitate over the mouse, the particular knot at the back of my neck loosening, the tilt of my head as if to listen. It told me, with the soft precision of someone reading my private instructions, what I would do before I did it. I moved the mouse. My hand hesitated. The knot loosened. My head tilted. The room felt small. I remember that slippage, how the thing that had been pattern and impression became definite and predictive. Prediction was dangerous because it suggested a loop. If something knows your next move, then you are on a path you cannot alter easily. The voice's predictions were not malicious in a cinematic way. They were clinical, like weather reports. They described me with scientific curiosity. That clinical tone made me angrier and colder than any shout could have. Anger is a poor bedfellow for the kind of fear that crawls in from the edges. It gave me a plan. I decided to record myself awake intentionally. I would sit and read from a book and keep the camera rolling. I would put on the headphones and hold the mic in my lap and narrate anything, numbers, colors, the sound of the street, and be present to watch myself on the other side, like a scientist setting a trap. I wanted to see movement in real time. Was some program listening and then synthesizing responses? Was someone remote controlling my Mac? I ran a line check, watched the levels, breathed into the microphone, and told myself out loud that this was for the record, that I was an objective observer. I was proud of the plan because it felt like agency. I left the room for 3 minutes and drank water. When I returned, 2 things had happened at once. The session had a new track, and the voice was suddenly in full clarity beneath my own recorded breaths. It didn't build to it. There was no creeping crescendo. One instant it was a ghost, the next it was a presence. It described the way I had set the glass down, the way I had turned the water off, how my thumb had brushed the rim. It cataloged those small physical acts with the casualness of a list. I could hardly move, my hands caught in a web of disbelief. I had recorded myself in the act, yet the voice knew the movement before the clip recorded it. Sequence was irrelevant, time folded like paper. That was when the final, terrible realization came. The voice wasn't just in my recordings. It was embedded in the act of recording. It seemed to live in the seams, between the take and the pause, in the way the microphone buffered silence, in the digital noise floor we usually ignore. It inhabited the liminal spaces where thought leaked into action. I had been inviting it into my life every night, because I was a person who cataloged silences, who loved the shape of a pause. It had found a doorway. What could I do? I thought of the obvious answers: burn the hard drives, leave the city, throw the gear in a river, and forget the stories. I did a little of each. I backed up critical files to the cloud and then deleted the local copies. I turned off my phone. I stayed with a friend for a night. who lived 3 subway stops away and tried to sleep under someone else's roof. At 2:13 a.m., I woke to the buzzing in my pocket, an email notification. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, and the subject line was a time code. Inside, an MP3 attached. The file played my voice, older and seasoned, followed by the whisper, which closed with the mundane observation that I had left my kettle on. I had not. They tell you how to break down like it's a recipe. First the sleep, then the paranoia, then the rituals of checking doors and watching cameras. My breakdown wasn't neat. It was noisy. It came with a chorus of small failures. I missed deadlines, I canceled shows, I forgot to eat. But there was also a bright, terrible clarity. If sound is the map your life makes, then I could read the terrain, and I could see the erosion. I began to understand that the voice had never been merely external. It was made of the parts of me I had failed to label, the soft, self-preserving mutter I made when I was tired. It was my underside, the low hum I didn't like to hear. Or maybe I was just rationalizing. Maybe an unseen system stitched together ambient recordings and found patterns where none existed. Maybe some bored technologist had access to my servers. Maybe I was inventing causality to hold on to a narrative that made sense. The ending doesn't come like a curtain. It comes like the last line you aren't sure you remembered reading. I learned that I could not partition myself from the audio I made. The recordings were mirrors that reflected not just the outward performance, but the inner architecture of attention. The voice in them had started as a needle, a tiny prickle beneath my skin. It grew into a seam, a persistent seam, and when I pulled at it, something in my life began to unravel in plain sight. 2 weeks after the kettle email, I sat down with my laptop and opened a blank project. My hands trembled, but the tremor was precise, the kind of affected focus you get when you mean to finish something. I hit record. I spoke about nothing in particular, the way that city blocks line up, the taste of overbrewed coffee, how the apartment light bloomed at sunset. I left the mic on and carried the laptop with me into the kitchen. I boiled water, I made coffee, I did everything the whisper had said I would do in the past and everything it would say in the future. If there was going to be a way out, it had to be through fullness, not avoidance. I decided, quietly, to invite the thing that had been inviting itself. When I sat back down, I listened to the track. For the first time, I didn't scrub. I didn't isolate. I just listened. I let the sound wash over me like a confession. The voice was there, present and patient. But this time, I recognized its timbre as one I had used to soothe a sleeping child in a memory that smelled of rain and lemon cleaner. It used the rhythms I used when I tried to make myself small and safe. It had learned my inflections the way a mirror learns the hollows of a face. I don't know if that change was real, or if it was a delusion I created to survive. The voice did not leave. It continued to appear in tracks. Sometimes it was cruelly precise. Sometimes it was simply a waveform you could stretch into meaning if you tried hard enough. But something inside me shifted. I stopped hunting for external culprits and started cataloging my own interior. I began to transcribe the whisper, not as a threat, but as a document of what I had hidden. I wrote it down and read it back to myself. I made episodes where I spoke about forgetting and about the small ways we stay safe from ourselves. My listeners wrote back with stories about buried memories and habits. The feedback warmed me. It also felt like negotiating with a shadow. This isn't a resolution. It's not brave or tidy. People keep listening to the podcast. Some nights the voice sings under the intro like a distant train. Some nights it's absent. Sometimes I think the voice scratches my name into the margin of a file because it likes the sound of being known. Sometimes I think it's no more than the echo of all the nights I sat with a microphone and waited for company. If you're hearing this as a voiceover in your head, as you're supposed to, I want to tell you something that is at once a warning and a consolation. The things we record are not inert. They keep shape. They keep weight. The recordings hold more than we intend. The lessons we learned, the ways we betray ourselves, the tiny private rituals we perform to stay whole. They can hold a presence. They can hold a mirror. And if you put a microphone to your life, sometimes something will answer. Sometimes the answer will be your own voice wearing a stranger's timbre. Sometimes it will be something else entirely. I used to think nothing could break me. Now I know that the thing that will break you isn't always loud. It can be a whisper, folded into the spaces you thought were safe. The small pauses, the gentle breaths between sentences. It can be a voice in your recordings telling you what you already knew and didn't want to say out loud. It can be the sound of attention turned inward until you're obliged to notice. And when that happens, you either learn to listen or you learn how to let the noise become part of the thing you return to the world. A voice that's honest because it came from a place you finally had to look at. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is small and the refrigerator hums like something alive, I will play an old track and let that whisper come up under my own words. I will not scrub it away. I will let it be. I do this because in the echo of that whisper, I hear the shape of my life, not neat, not whole, but finally audible. And if the whisper ever starts to describe something you haven't yet done, don't panic. Lean in. Listen. It might just be telling you the part of yourself you've been filing away, waiting for a microphone to call it home.